time. So I'm Tom Mather. Hello. Thank you for giving up at lunchtime. I'm director of DCRC. And on behalf of the whole research centre, we'd like to warmly invite you to the 24-25 DCRC Seminar Series. It's a space for unpacking ideas, unlocking imagination, and sparking some conversations. We were founded in 2009, and we're an open collaborative network of critical thinkers and doers whose work connects issues at the heart of society, culture, creativity, and technology. We conduct transdisciplinary research, knowledge exchange, and teaching that contributes to a more just and sustainable society with a focus on people, policy, place, and practice, or the P's. These seminars, we started these at the start of this last calendar year, are a chance to join us to find more about the work we do. So we've had, I think this is the fourth or fifth one. We will carry on over the next academic year and do this. So 2 or 3 bits of housekeeping, and then I will shut up and let Mandy and Tom talk. First of all, to note, this session is being recorded. I think you'd have had that flag as you joined or when Amy pressed the button. Second one is happy to keep cameras and mics off. If you've got questions for the presenters, then drop them in the chat and we'll pick them up at the end. But today's talk is, in fact, no, I'll do the next seminar. And just to flag, the next one after this is on the 27th of November. Again, 1 o'clock till 2 o'clock. We'll be sharing invites soon. And that will be with Dr. Tarek Virani and called provisionally Organising Resilience, based on 4 years of data from Tarek's Resilience Toolkit, looking at creative industry freelancers, micros, and SMEs. But today's talk, I'm very, very delighted to introduce Mandy Rose and Tom Livingstone to spend the next 40 minutes or so talking to you about multisensory storytelling and the structures of feeling. They're unpacking a research collaboration, and there will be some detail and notes at the end and maybe a quiz or not. Okay, Mandy and Tom, over to you. I will be quiet.
Okay, thanks, Tom. And thanks everyone for joining us here, giving up your lunchtime to join us here today. We're really glad to have the opportunity to share this work in progress. So the work we're going to be discussing emerges out of a number of contexts. Tom and I are researchers within the Digital Cultures Research Centre's Evolving Media Strand. And I've developed some of the ideas around documentary I'll be referring to within the iDocs interactive and immersive documentary project with Judith Aston and others. I'm a co-investigator and Tom's a research fellow on the University of Bristol-led UKRI Strength in Places MyWorld project, a major 5-year project. And within MyWorld, our role is in bringing humanities research to developments in creative industries and having a translational knowledge exchange role between academic research and industry practice in the context of media change. So Tom and I are part of a work package with creative industry partners Old Vic, Aardman and Lux Eterna. And this work package involves commissioning creative projects with R&D dimensions. And we're researching 3 of these experimental productions as case studies. We also have some capacity to initiate strands of research that investigate themes reflected across the MyWorld programme, and the multisensory storytelling research emerged out of that context. So this work's a collaboration, as our title mentioned, on multiple fronts, as we'll explain. We're going to try and suggest how Tom and I have brought our own research expertise and backgrounds to the project, to this theme. It's also a collaboration with the immersive artist Sasha Wares, as I'll explain in a little while. And this strand of work also depends on engagement with a wider network of artists and creative technologists with whom we want to understand the challenges and opportunities of multisensory storytelling. Among these, researchers and creators in the immersive arts projects and At the Bridge are crucial collaborators. So I'm going to hand to Tom now, who's going to begin by talking about his underlying research.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Mandy. I can't tell because I'm sharing my screen whether or not I'm just a disembodied voice or if you can see me.
We can see you, Tom.
Oh, great. Fantastic. Okay, great. Well, hello. Very nice to be here. So yeah, my research background, this sort of deep biographical dive, really starts with Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the Robert Zemeckis film, which we had in my house on Laserdisc. And that was a very sort of strange constellation of film and technology, because it allowed me to flick frame by frame through these scenes, these sort of absolutely quintessential hybrid image scenes, and build a great sense of curiosity about how the photographic and the animated can be combined in a fashion that solicits our suspension of disbelief, despite the obvious legibility of the artifice. So fast forwarding out of my childhood to my sort of like early academic career, the combination of the photographic and the sort of non-veridical occurred to me as being characteristic of more and more mainstream film culture. And I became interested in the discrete operations and procedures of hybridity and how they contribute to our broader structures of credulity throughout the late 90s and the early noughties blockbuster film culture. So obviously post-photographic manipulation takes many forms, and most hybrid images are a layered product of multiple techniques. So my research broke the hybrids down into a discrete set of procedures. So that's the colorization, compositing, time ramping, and physically based rendering. Oh, excuse me, physically based rendering. But in each of these areas, the project grew beyond a technical curiosity and became less about how the effect is achieved and more about what impact does the effect have when it achieves ubiquity. So, for example, looking at colorization in the top left-hand corner, that's a still from Peter Jackson's They Shall Not Grow Old. What impact does colorization have on the archive? Because only certain black and white images, it turns out, are amenable to digital colorization. Therefore, the process that Jackson undertook of, quote, making the archive more accessible to contemporary eyes became, in fact, a process of updating the ineffable particularity of the material past to the techno-cultural conditions of the present, and incidentally adding a whole layer of semantics and politics while doing so. Anyone who's seen They Shall Not Grow Old might remember that it is absolutely awash in red for blood, for poppies, for dramatic effects, which is interesting because obviously the film from the trenches was mostly captured on orthochromatic film stocks, which won't have registered red with any sense of detail whatsoever. But nevertheless, Jackson adds this whole sort of semantic potency to red, and that's a sort of semiotic impact of colorization. Compositing too is a way of representing impossible spaces on screen, but it's also a way of giving the impression of 3D space by guiding our eyes across a 2D surface. So the spaces of digital compositing that I looked at are literally composed of sort of plausible juxtapositions and semantic overlays that take a photographically recorded space and augment it. Now, this language is not accidental. Those operations, the schematization of 3D space by 2D overlay in mixed reality and augmented reality are a central tenet of spatial computing, the sort of, the emergent media paradigm that is surrounding us as we speak. So compositing, as I conceived of it, falls on at the narrow end of a trajectory that results in our cultural predispositions for mixed and augmented reality displays, because it already, as you can see here with Tony Stark, figured spaces as saturated with latent digital flows and information fields. The hybrid technique of time ramping, here illustrated on the top right by a still from Transformers, and characterizes what's called Bayhem, Michael Bay's signature style, is what happens when you oscillate between fast and slow motion. So thinking about this in terms of post-photographic manipulation, what's being hybridized is the old contract between film and audience that at 24 frames a second, film's temporality is isomorphic or indistinguishable from lived duration. Now, of course, fast motion and slow motion aren't digital effects, but the swooping and scrubbing between them in post-photographic editing software is. And what's more, the way in which this trope is used, as I sort of explored, always hones our attention on a pivotal moment and celebrates the intensification of duration. The idea that inside of every second there are microseconds, and inside of every microsecond there are milliseconds, that has manifold echoes beyond screen media in some of the basic affordances of digital techniques in contexts like high frequency trading and so on and so forth. So the contemporary suspicion that many of us have that our technology is somehow preempt or anticipate us is something that I found refracted in this aesthetic of time ramping, which celebrates the manipulation of the flow of time at the level of the microsecond. So, as I mentioned, compositing, time ramping, and color grading are more often than not layered and interdependent hybrid procedures. So having spent a lot of time breaking them into discrete procedures, the more pressing question arose as how to actually deal with them when they're all smushed together. And now this is where my technical and sort of cultural interest in VFX coagulated into a more a disciplinarily precise research focus, which I loosely describe as media epistemology. So one of the touchstones for this is Willem Flusser, who's all in all a very programmatic thinker in his description of how media technologies don't just filter the world, but fundamentally co-create humanity's relationship with reality. A key example being how the cultural experience of time, this is an example of his programmatic thinking. The cultural experience of time as linear only really emerged with linear alphabetic writing, organized as one thing after another. And his thesis is that, you know, our sense of history, our experience of history is directly related to linear writing as a media format. So when it comes to photographic and computational technologies, Flusser's key insight is that the images that they produce are habitually misperceived, i.e. a photograph is constantly misperceived as a window onto reality rather than a flat surface. And this misperception has profound ramifications. So I extended this idea of the misperception of images as transparent, as windows onto a world that can't possibly exist, and the consequences of this misperception into my work on hybrid images, motivated by this question, specifically that the critical reception of these images demands a level of consciousness that corresponds to the one in which they were produced. So within the context of hybrid images, the question is, are we capable of thinking about them with a technical sophistication that's commensurate to the way in which they're produced? So all in all, this research resulted in a book, which I'll put the reference to in the notes, just published, which summarized this media epistemological thinking within the context of the incredibly rapid pace of change in visual media culture. In order to grapple with the sense of the overwhelming speed of change, I borrowed this concept of the vanishing point, initially from Siegfried Zielinski, but Evan Williams does a very good job of summarizing it in that quote there. And it's this thinking about the arc, again taken from Raymond Williams, from emergent to dominant, as it applies to new technologies, that I bring to the MyWorld project and with its focus on R&D. So throughout the case study work that Mandy and I are doing on the various experimental productions, my focus is on the relationship between the possibilities being opened up by the new technologies and also the cultural predispositions and naturalized ways of interacting with those technologies. Because I'm keen to make sure that the technical defaults and the structural assumptions of pre-existing formats don't weigh too heavily on emergent media forms, because then, briefly to state in a polemic fashion, because then R&D might be undertaken in a blinkered and constrained fashion, roadmapped by the wrong set of entrenched interests. So it's after that summary of my background, I'm going to hand back to Mandy.
Thanks, Tom. So my research at UE since I joined as a research fellow back in 2009 has looked at the ethical, political and epistemological ramifications of emerging documentary practices. Documentary, I won't get into definitions really here, but I think of documentary very broadly here as the creative treatment of real world themes. And documentary has been a very malleable form. Generations of technologies have been harnessed by documentarians very soon, actually, very quickly after they've been invented, for what they might offer the project of reflecting and critiquing our shared world. So you can see here, top left, housing problems, a documentary made in 1936, very early use of film sound. Below it, John JFK in Primary from 1960, one of the first uses of handheld sync sound camera. And on the bottom right, the Video Nation project from the 1990s, a project that I co-produced at the BBC, where we've used the camcorder in the hands of members of the public, a very early use of digital technology on a broadcast station. So the affordances of these technologies have implications for the claims that documentary makes about its relationship to the real. For example, with the handheld camera in 1960 came the idea that it was possible to capture unfolding events with the impartiality of the fly on the wall, a rhetoric of objectivity that was core to the direct cinema movement, that people who made that film in the 60s, and has been really influential in documentary ever since. So the next slide, please. Then with digital came a raft of new technological possibilities that producers engaged to make works that were by turns interactive, participatory, gamified, personalized, works that challenged the very kind of ontology of 20th century documentary. For example, bottom right here, Do Not Track, was an online documentary that responds to the location and activities of the user. It knows who you are, where you are, what the weather is like, and it responds to those as you work your way through the documentary. So if a work is personalized in this way, there is no single version. This challenges the very idea of a corpus of documentary work that had been a given until then. Next slide, please. So after all this innovation in the early 2000s, the 2010s then saw the unexpected and very rapid take-up within documentaries of another generation of technology, the technologies we call immersive. VR, virtual reality, AR, augmented reality, MR, mixed reality, all often talked of together as XR, expanded or extended reality. So a variety of factors came together then to produce what I've called the immersive turn in documentary. Hang on, sorry. Why did documentary people take up these technologies so rapidly? So there was a lot of hype coming from Silicon Valley, and in particular, an infamous TED talk by a producer called Chris Milk, in which he claimed that VR was intrinsically an empathy machine. If you just put that into Google, you'll see how many people watch that. You know, a lot of people have watched that piece of work, that TED talk, and been very affected by it. There's also an illusion that's considered the chief characteristic of VR, the feeling of presence in relation to events depicted, which dovetails with the feeling of being there in respect to real live events. That was the desire of a particular trajectory, that direct cinema trajectory within documentary. And XR also dovetails with a deeper drive within media history towards ever more lifelike representations of the world that André Bazin called the myth of total cinema. So between 2017 and 2020, we explored what was happening as documentary met VR within the EPSRC Immersive Documentary Encounters project. It was a multidisciplinary project with computer science, experimental psychology, and myself from documentary. We mapped this space of VR non-media, non-fiction in an online mediography. We ran audience studies in the lab and in the wild. While 20th century documentaries were usually about viewing media, weighing up a representation that one looked at on a screen, we found that even in the simplest versions of VR, in 360 video, for example, participants experienced these VR works as fundamentally different from what are sometimes called flatty videos. Surrounded by the image, they felt as if inside the world depicted. And I'm fond of this quote from her making, a film scholar, on experiencing one of these early VR works. And she says, the possibility of any kind of masterful gaze genuinely feels somewhat undone by the fact that we're in a 360-degree space. So, you know, I think I'm on the next slide now, please, Tom. So, you know, while there are many reservations, I have many reservations about virtual reality, and many reasons why people, you know, people reject it. People reject it because of Silicon Valley's involvement. They reject it because of the headset, which can feel like a very potent symbol of digital disconnection. People have concerns about environmental impact, about privacy. You know, and many of these concerns actually Verity McIntosh discussed in, you know, very well in her recent talk in this slot. But there are also reasons to pay attention. Ian Christie, one of the kind of leading film historians in the UK, recently talked about immersive, and made an interesting kind of claim that from his perspective, that we are now living through a media revolution no less drastic than the 1890s when cinema began to reach screens. And Ian Christie's view is that critical attention of immersive is inhibited by a consistent hostility among arbiters of aesthetic taste to the creation of spatial illusion. So we think it's important to pay attention to these developments and understand what they mean for the people who do these experiences I'll call immersants. And these immersive documentaries are very much experiential. They offer encounters rather than, as I've said, viewing experiences. The more complex projects that are known as room scale projects engage the whole body in that process. They draw together what Brian Winston has called the technologies of seeing that have been the mainstay of media to date, but also engage what feminist technological historian Anne Balsamo has called technologies of corporeality. You know, I'm interested in the phenomenological dimensions of these XR projects, the ways they engage the body and how that impacts meaning. Also interested in the kind of themes and subjects documentary producers approach given this potential for documentary as encounter. Now, a major UK agency who've engaged with these possibilities over the last decade is Marshmallow Laser Feast. It's a brilliant name. They've made a number of remarkable XR projects that explore encounters with the more than human. In the experience on the right, in the picture on the right here, we live in an ocean of air. You get to see how your body interacts with your environment as you breathe, and the experience kind of breaks down a sense that we and nature are, or that we and nature are separate. It, you know, increases that sense of connection with nature, I think, in important ways. So if you go to the next slide, please, Tom. So immersive technologies are also being harnessed for reimagining our shared world, for virtual time travel and speculative futures. An early speculative VR work that drew international attention was Bidarban First Light, produced by Anishinaabe artist Lisa Jackson for the National Film Board of Canada. It's one of a cluster of works by North American and Australian Indigenous artists that have taken advantage of VR for time travel. In Bidarban, you find yourself in a realistic, computer-generated version of Toronto, but this city has been overtaken by nature. It's unsettling to be plunged into what feels like a post-apocalyptic scenario. But as you grow used to the dawn light, which is what Bidarban means, and begin to explore, you start to see differently. People, Indigenous people, are going about their business, travelling by canoe through the waterways. Vegetables are growing on the roofs of buildings. This isn't a scenario of violence or desperation. And the future that Bidarban returns us to is a future where the original inhabitants of Toronto is foregrounded. The work is all in Indigenous languages with some translation, and it foregrounds the belief systems of those people. So while VR has been the focus of criticism for its orientation towards emotion and its privileging of feeling over thought, Bidarban, and indeed the Marshmallow Laser Feast encounters with the more than human worlds, are projects that engage the affective potential of VR, not for the sake of emotion itself, but to cast our normal ways of thinking and structures of feeling into question. So I'm going to hand back to you, Tom. Oh, no, I'm not. First of all, I'm going to do this slide, which is the handover to you. Okay.
Right.
So our next section is on multisensory storytelling, this joint research theme we've been developing. So, as I said, documentary has tended to be an early adopter of new technologies, but looking at other research and R&D in the MyWorld programme and at the wider immersive field, we felt that multisensory storytelling was a theme that demanded attention as a new field emerging at the intersection of emerging technologies and innovative storytelling practices, and was a field that was challenging the audiovisual paradigm that has dominated media to date. So we're beginning to map the contours of multisensory storytelling. This image shows Noni de la Peña's Hunger in LA, the project that perhaps most clearly signaled the recent emergence of this work when it was launched at the Sundance Film Festival in 2012. And we're also situating these developments philosophically and historically.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Yes, so in order to pursue the project of thinking about multisensory storytelling from a sort of media epistemological perspective, it was necessary for us to, essentially sketch out the narrative of the dominant media episteme, and that's where this sort of concept of oculocentric media comes from, and what I'm going to just walk you through now. The sort of like paradigmatic presence of oculocentric media in our understanding of documentary epistemologies and media epistemologies more broadly. So oculocentrism, that is the prioritization of the visuality and visual experience as the core feature of subjective experience, is largely inseparable from most accounts of media history. And that's thanks to its imbrication with the technologies and techniques of perspective. So in the broadest possible term, the formalization of perspective has been described as the most important event of the Renaissance. As a means of representing objects and their relations in space, perspective was a key technique for empirical science, architecture, engineering, Cartesian philosophy, and of course, figurative painting. So as described by William Ivans, perspective is a practical way of securing a rigorous two-way or reciprocal metrical relationship between the shapes of objects as definitely located in space and their representations. It's a representational schema that situates Euclidean geometry and logics within the visual, whilst at the same time naturalizing this logic as a given of able-bodied human visual experience. Essentially, it's the visual technique that underpins our notions of objectivity. Now, this naturalization of perspective as an element of visual experience has been critiqued most famously by Erwin Panofsky in the 1920s, whose essay Perspective as Symbolic Form serves as inspiration for an array of media epistemological thinking about perspectival technologies as tools of power. So, for example, Bruno Latour or Paul Virilio's concept of the logistics of perception. But sort of, again, a sort of exemplification of this is Lev Manovich's 1993 essay, where Manovich tries to wrap all of the operative potentials of perspective and the way in which it functionalizes visual representation into his concept of visual nominalism, which he summarizes as the use of vision to capture and identify individual objects and spaces by recording distances and shapes. So Manovich also sees a step change in the epistemic and socio-political power of perspective when it becomes automated through technologies such as the camera or radar, 3D computer graphics. As the aforementioned Willem Flusser points out, photography makes the codes and processes of perspective disappear from view. Photographs are seemingly non-symbolic and so are treated naively as windows onto reality. So with photography's automation of perspective, the ideological functions of perspective disappear, even as their racial and colonial uses proliferate throughout the 19th and 20th century. But crucially, this dominance of perspective in photography is also tied to the dominance of visuality in thinking about knowledge. and the human sensorium. This is particularly the case in, for example, the McLuhanite tradition of conceiving of media as extensions of the human senses. So again, Flusser also conceives of epistemic technologies as being almost exclusively visual, as it's only within the visual that the misrecognition of images as windows can take place. McLuhan likewise, although he discusses the sense ratios, making reference to this John Comenius's sketch for like his first visual encyclopedia from 1658, he presupposes, McLuhan this is, a natural balance of the senses and the human sensorium, and attributes the dominance of ocular centrism to the prominence of writing and print media. Now, whilst there have been several attempts to sort of readdress this within McLuhan's thinking, a lot of sort of like attempts to sort of recuperate his ocular-centric thinking within the context of electronic media, the dominance of the audiovisual media interface has resulted across media thinking in a marginalization of thinking about media and epistemology distinct from the audiovisual paradigm. Ultimately, it's a kind of chicken and egg problem. What comes first, the ubiquity of visual media or its over-indexing and the over-indexing of the visual as the key epistemic frame? But it's this over-indexing that also results in an under-consideration of other modalities, touch, taste, and smell, as well as proprioceptive and interoceptive systems. These sit far below sight and hearing in the dominant understanding of how human cognition operates in a densely mediated environment. And it's within this context that our multisensory storytelling, the theoretical framework of our multisensory storytelling project aims to gain a foothold. Over to you, Mandy.
Okay, so what senses are being incorporated into XR projects? Here are briefly some documentary examples. So movement is a fundamental means through which we explore and know the physical world. It was largely absent from 20th century media experience. Proprioception is our sensory awareness of movement, of our bodies in space. And through positional tracking, virtual environments can be mapped onto physical space so that a participant can move around while in VR, and the virtual world within the headset will respond to their real world actions. Examples include ones I've mentioned: We Live in an Ocean of Air, Noise La Peña's Hungry in LA. This is a still from In Search of Repetitive Beats, now touring the UK, an internationally acclaimed interactive VR work that takes participants back to spend an evening in the rave scene of 1989. It's a story about the joy of movement, dance, and collective experience in which proprioception is vital. So smell has a history within media experiences and in theatre going back to the 19th century. It's re-emerging now thanks to advances in the creation of synthetic odours. The Feelies is a studio founded by Grace Boyle in 2015, focused on developing immersive works that are multi-sensory from first concept. Boyle is interested in cross-modality, how senses go together to make up perception. And one of the Feelies' first works was Munduruku, the fight to defend the heart of the Amazon, a project created with Greenpeace, reflecting the struggle of the Munduruku people against the development of a hydroelectric dam on their land. It was a VR work that included smell and heat, designed to bridge between urban and indigenous communities in Brazil. And this is an image from an installation in Sao Paulo. Without doubt, the most common sensory innovation we're seeing is in the field of touch. Haptic interfaces are ubiquitous, made every day through our phone use. And many XR projects involve haptic interactions. Among them, last year's IDFA Immersive Award winner, Turbulent Jamais Vu, which is a mixed reality project produced by XR artists Ben Andrews and Emma Roberts, exploring movement, disembodiment, and the fragility of perception. It draws on Ben's personal experience with a brain condition in which his sensory interaction with the world becomes suddenly unfamiliar, which is characterized as the opposite of déjà vu. So, what's at stake here for documentary? In these examples, I'd argue that meaning emerges as the immersant explores their media surround and pays attention to the effects that their multisensory interactions produce. Knowledge isn't gained through the safe, arguably masterful viewing of material on a screen, but through forms of openness, even vulnerability. And to think about this, we've borrowed from film phenomenologist Laura Marks, her idea of knowledge production through tactile epistemology. And also we're interested in anthropologist Michael Tausig's work on non-Western epistemologies and his idea of knowledge production as yielding knowing. So multisensory story works hold potential for ways of knowing that take us beyond what Donna Haraway has called the God trick of seeing everything from nowhere, in favour of forms of situated knowledge, albeit virtual knowledge. So yeah, next slide, please. A project which has inspired this multisensory storytelling work and is core to our exploration is a work called Inside by immersive artist Sasha Wares. Inside is a project in development with investment from MyWorld. We're researching the project as a case study. It's a biography of the American artist Judith Scott, who died in 2005. Scott had Down syndrome and was profoundly deaf. She became a sculptor late in life, making luminous abstract works out of twine. Building on her previous augmented reality project, the Museum of Austerity, Sasha Wares is exploring how universal design principles, which prioritise equitable access, can be integrated into the production and delivery of XR media. In developing this immersive biography in VR, I don't know if I've said, Sasha determined to make a work that would be legible to Judith were she still alive. A non-verbal work, one that eschews the grammar of editing and employs sensory modalities that were central to Judith's life: light, vibration, heat. Inside then highlights an important feature of multisensory work, how it can centre forms of sensory experience that have been previously marginalised or excluded from media. We see multisensory storytelling and universal design as inseparable concerns. As a field of technological R&D and experimental practice, multisensory storytelling has the potential to offer alternatives to the audio-visual linear media paradigm. So back to you, Tom, for next steps.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So yes, next step. So this is obviously a live research project with, quite a substantial period of time ahead of us, which we're going to fill with the following upcoming research activities, events, and outputs. So a date for your diaries is the Coming to Our Senses Multisensory Storytelling Summit, which will be a industry academic hybrid sort of meeting of minds to be held at the Sheds in the spring or summer of next year. Now we have a keynote from Knowledge de Peña of the narrative and emerging media. Sorry, I can't. Well, the Haptics for Inclusion Lab at Arizona State University. She will be coming over and also as part of a program of talks in and around UE. But we are conceiving of this summit as a sort of opportunity to really instigate important conversations between technologists, academics, creative producers and creative technologists going forward to sort of share progress and share sort of visions of the future with regards to multisensory storytelling. And it will be a sort of pivotal academic activity for our project. Alongside that, we're going to be conducting a sequence of what we're calling pioneer interviews, which are going to be forward-looking interviews with key figures within the emerging format. So, for example, people like Darren Emerson, who's the director of In Pursuit of Repetitive Beats, and Grace Boyle, for example, who produced the Munduruku experience. The idea being we are hopefully going to sort of gather their learnings from working with the media in its sort of nascent emergence, and sort of use that data to sort of discern trajectories for innovation going forward. Last but not least, I will be working on some bid developments to hopefully take this multisensory storytelling research beyond the life of the MyWorld project. And this is obviously a call for further opportunities for collaboration, because if there's been anything that you're interested in from today's seminar that you think might have a home in this ongoing research, then be very interested to talk to you about it. And ultimately, I will be endeavouring to open up ways of exploring new pathways for mainstreaming and innovation within this technological cultural field, mapping networks of R&D and experimentation, and just uncovering new trajectories for and new opportunities for developing work within this emergent format. So thank you very much for listening. I'm going to stop sharing my screen because unfortunately the video has been interrupting my reading straight from the screen. But we would also love to open it up to any questions if there are any. Okay, I'll just have a quick look at the chat. Mandy's just put in some of our outputs. Fantastic, thank you very much. Daniel, is the research strictly focused on media? I do XR for manufacturing. Absolutely not. I think the degree to which XR is, well, I mean, it's long history of being folded in with manufacturing and design principles. I think that the interrelation of XR technologies and manufacture and design is a crucial aspect of their epistemological potency. I mean, the reason why they're so impactful on the world we live in is because these technologies are used to design our lived environments. So no, I don't see there's any sort of separation of those two fields.
No, indeed. Agreed. And, obviously there are borrowings backwards and forwards, the haptic technologies that people are using in cultural and creative projects, have industrial applications elsewhere. So yeah, there's that separation doesn't kind of hold. Yeah.
My camera and mic are finally working. So just set them on. So yeah, I put that question there, and especially because I'm using the HoloLens as mixed reality for the interaction with the real environment. So not just about designing this virtual space that perhaps proprioception and some of the senses are more real, but actually now the visual elements are either real and digital, and then you're engaging with sounds that are both digital and real. So the combination of these two things, especially for the new transition to new technologies in industry towards Industry 4.0, and I'm focusing on machine operators, so those that are going to be engaging with these technologies full of data, full of an invisible world, and how we can engage with that through these devices.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I would just add to that obviously with so many of these technologies and these interfaces landing as standards for the ways in which work can be performed, some of the research that we're doing into inclusive design and the sort of accessibility issues around XR become increasingly important, because there's a sort of these as standard interfaces. Some of these technologies presuppose certain types of bodies and certain types of sort of mobility, And I think that this is a perfect opportunity to do some thinking around that as they become increasingly, as they form bottlenecks for access to certain types of work and certain types of industrial activity. If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, I wonder then, because you mentioned ubiquitous, for example, and the focus on the visuals. And if mixed reality is about mixing real with digital, then now it puts into question the interfaces that we use as the norm. So we're using flat screens to engage with the digital world. So now we can say mixed reality as a change or as something that is invading or something that is an evolution from what we already have. It's like the next step, and it could actually release some of the limitations that we have with flat screens.
Absolutely. No, but I mean, I'd say it's an opportunity for having these conversations rather than being like, denigrating the possibilities of the HoloLens as, for example, a standard interface. No, I completely agree with you. It's a sort of potent time for having these conversations.
Yeah, long-term impact as well can be negative. Yes, of course. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just reading the Jack Lowe's comment, which is, really interesting. Thanks, Jack. Jack is asking about our engagement with the kind of field of, psychogeographical cultural practice, walking and wider arts that engage multiple senses. I guess, Jack, those are definitely really interesting contexts for this work. But we are absolutely thinking about, what kind of sets this work slightly apart is that we're thinking about media in particular and thinking about how media is kind of, as it were, evolving into these different sensory spaces. So yeah, you're pointing to one of the important contexts. But I guess, so I think it's one of the contexts. Can you see that question, Tom?
I can, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think also, again, it's very important to have these contexts and also the context as alternative trajectories as well, because it goes without saying that quite a few of the, as Mandy alluded to, some of the suspicions that are sort of leveled against immersive media formats is their sort of, implication with Silicon Valley, so on and so forth. So there is definitely in this space an appetite for the co-optation of pre-existing practices within digital formats that potentially commodify those previously much more exploratory and experimental practices within a sort of a technological container that doesn't do justice to the experimentations that pre-existed them. So again, it's all about there being such a sort of exciting moment to be having these conversations.
It raises not least the question of what we call. I mean, we've been, we haven't sort of talked around it that much. We've kind of gone for this multisensory storytelling, but actually that's too vague. In response to your question, Jack, it is too vague because it doesn't specify that kind of mediated nature of what we're looking at. So yeah, thanks for the question. So yeah, Tom.
I was just scrolling up to see Ashan Ikram's question. It appears that a lot of discussion had an overlap with what we now in cyber and CS are calling digital twins or digital twinning. Is that a correct assumption? Broadly, yes. So,
well, yes and no. Yes and no, because digital twinning is quite a specific practice, isn't it? That is about developing, as I understand it, developing a kind of a simulacra or a replica, a virtual replica of a real world object, place, or place. And in that sense, digital twinning is not, as I understand it, in general, a creative or creative practice. So there isn't, as from my understanding of digital twinning, there is not a kind of that, you know, the attempt is to create something where there's an indexical relationship between the virtual and the physical world. So I guess our interest, while digital twins are super interesting, I think our concern is more with these creative practices and how these creative practices engage audiences, or immersants, as I tend to call them, and engage kind of forms of meaning making.
Mm-hmm. No, I see the sort of caveat there, and yes, would say that insofar as digital twins, the interface perhaps is what would interest us most.
Yeah.
Indy, sorry, there was a follow up. Yeah, Hassan.
Can I just say something in that context? So I would say that the more orthodox understanding of digital twins, or the definition as it exists, is what Mandy, you've said is true. However, there is an ongoing discussion or research efforts into, for example, that if you take the concept of twinning a physical context, it doesn't have to be an artifact, it could be an environment, or it could be a scenario. If you twin it in a digital context, then can you interact with it? Can those interactions be of predictive or prescriptive nature in terms of what can happen in the future? So how stories can evolve from the current context of time, if there is a digital twin, into the future, and also hypothetically recreating timelines into the past. So on a scale of on a temporal scale, going forwards or backwards, using immersive technologies or interactive immersive technologies in addition to a digital twin sounds something that can be interesting.
Oh, thank you, Hassan, for that clarification. And that seems super interesting, and like it really kind of dovetails with the kind of time travels, the speculative futures and pasts that people are exploring creatively in VR. So yes, be great to discuss that further, perhaps. Is that something that you're working on?
To an extent, yes. It's mostly an interest at the moment. Have been part of a few sandpits on how immersive technologies and AR, VR, and digital twins could be used, for example, to model inauthenticity in a future world where content is more and more likely to be a blurry line between authenticity and inauthenticity. For example, there is at this point in time there exist social media influencers who are completely generative. They are not physical people. They are not physical entities, but they feel, and their perception is of a person, and it's difficult to then draw a line between how that pans into the future, where more interactions are going to be with those artifacts. How do we define authentic interactions, inauthentic interactions? Are they good? Are they bad? All those interesting questions.
Okay, interesting.
Really interesting. Well, I'd also, just to sort of explore, just to point to a tangent that goes from that. Obviously, our title is Multisensory Storytelling. Storytelling being, like, very traditionally a sort of retrospective practice, and all of these the sort of what you're saying about digital twins being interactions with digitized entities for sort of speculative thinking about the future is a something that I think we need to dwell on as how that fits in with our sense of storytelling. Because obviously at the moment our principal case study is a VR biography of someone who lived who was born in the mid 20th century. And so, yeah, how does storytelling operate as a sort of futural orientation? It's something that I think it would be super interesting to unpack, and perhaps digital twinning is the perfect context for that. I was just scrolling up with someone we didn't. Indy asked, you mentioned earlier that most media in the 20th century has been mostly flat visual interactions. Wants to hear your thoughts on why this might be. To which I would say that I think from a sort of like media archaeological point of view, so many dynamic, three-dimensional and sort of haptic interactions, technological interactions, it's not that they didn't exist, it's just that they failed to become as paradigmatic and as sort of as dominant as flat visual media. I think the screen is a technology that has left a lot of dead technologies in its wake. And why that might be, I don't I don't quite think we have the time to unpack. But yeah, no, I think flatness in visual interactions and visuality more broadly is something that is certainly it was not the only alternative. It's just merely a sort of dominant paradigm. I think.
Well, I don't know if there aren't any more pressing questions. Then a few things by way of wrapping up. Really, I wanted to say thanks, Amy, for lots of things, for allowing us to be here successfully, as it were, today, but also for posting in the chat that Undershed, the new immersive gallery at Watershed, opens this coming weekend, and I think, it's worth saying a couple of things about that. The fact that Bristol has Undershed is really kind of indicative of the engagement with immersive arts that has been going on in the region, and the kind of position Bristol holds in the region. So I would say we have a really precious opportunity to see work which is very hard to see in many cases. So please take advantage of it, be a friend to Watershed, go along to Undershed and check out the work. And because we need to support it, for it to continue to be there. That's Undershed. I wanted to also say something that I meant to say in the introduction, which is, some of you may be aware that there is an immersive research network at UE, which has recently reconvened after a pause. And it would be great if some of the people who are here today might want to join up to the immersive network. I will post in the chat the Teams link that for the immersive network. And any other things that you want to say, Tom, by way of wrapping up?
Beyond, thank you very much for being here. No.
Yeah. So no, I will, yes, join Tom in saying thank you all so much for being here. It's been great that you have. And thanks, as I say, Amy and Tom, Abba, for hosting us. And Tom, Abba, are you going to say something by way of closing while I find a link to the immersive network?
Yes, if you can find the link, just remind everybody the next one of these, and I think Amy should drop it in the chat, is on the 27th of November. So if you can mark that in your diaries. It has been brilliant to see so many people here. I think, I know it's a busy time of the year. Wednesdays are not always the best day. They should be the best day, logically, but really, thank you for giving me at lunchtime. Thank you for the engagement. We will be doing more of these over the coming year. I'm filling in time while Mandy finds the link to the immersive network.
Yeah, I don't know how to actually get the link.
Okay,
Sorry,
well,
Mandy, I've shared it. Sorry, in the chat.
Thank you very much. Brilliant.
Thanks,
thank you. Okay.
Brilliant. Okay, it's 2:00.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mandy. Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Amy. And we will see you next time.
Yeah. Okay.
Brilliant.
Bye.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great talk. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.